All right. Good morning to some and good afternoon to others. Thank you so much for joining us today to hear our discussion on soil management. Before we get started, just a little housekeeping. This webinar is worth 1 CEU through the ISA. If you did not fill in your ISA certification number during your registration, then you can enter that now into the questions box over there on the right-hand portion of your monitor. Just click on that little arrow that's pointing left down there towards the bottom, and you'll see something that says questions. Just stick your certification number and name in there now and make sure you're accredited with your 1 CEU. At any time during the webinar, if you come up with a question, please also feel free to go ahead and put your question right there in that question box, and we will get to it at the end during our question and answer part of the webinar at the conclusion. And this webinar is being recorded, so afterwards you will be able to acquire a link to find this recording again. All of our webinars this season are also being recorded, so if you have some webinars that you're unable to attend for whatever reason, you're still interested, they can be found on our website, and we can send you out the link to that again at the conclusion of our webinar today. So the voice coming through your monitor right now is none other than myself, Patrick Anderson. I'm an arborologist with Rainbow Tree Care Scientific Advancements, and what that is a fancy term for tech support. So I work with our internal staff and our clients to help them solve their plant health care problems. So at any time, you can feel free to either email me or call me direct, and you can always call our Solutions Center, where you can, of course, find technical support along with ordering any of our Rainbow products. So real quick, the background between Rainbow Tree Care Scientific Advancements is we are actually born out of a plant health care company that has grown into a full-service tree care company in the Twin Cities of Minnesota. We've been around for 35 years. We currently have 135 full-time employees, which that expands quite a bit, the amount of people we employ during the growing season. Currently, we stand at about 47 ISA certified arborists, 10 ISA board certified master arborists, and we're also an accredited company through the Tree Care Industry Association. As a company, we have a full research and development department, and we partner with many, many different institutions, both public and private, to bring you products and protocols that you can depend upon. And although I don't have the number for 2014, in 2013 we had over 57 research trials. So with that being said, we'll get into our discussion today about soils. So our intended outcomes is to understand why soil is important to trees, understand soil and plant nutrient interaction, and understand ways of making our soils healthier, because at the end of the day, a healthier soil is going to mean healthier plants. So what do trees get from soils? Well, number one is they get structural support. So if it wasn't for a good structured soil, our plants would simply just be falling over. We know we get structural roots out into that soil, which create friction that hold the plant in place. So during windstorms and things like that, we're not having our plants fall over. Of course, we get just about all, not necessarily all, but a good portion of our mineral nutrients or elemental nutrients come from the soil. We, of course, get water from the soil, which is very important for many different things that plants do, including photosynthesis, and oxygen. All terrestrial, well, just about every cell that respirates is going to require oxygen. So those plant cells and the roots that are in the soil are going to require oxygen. So we do need oxygen in our soils as well. If we look to see where our roots really are, as arborists, many of us know that our roots are really going to be in that top horizon of soil. So we're looking at the, oh, looks like we have some, is everyone hearing okay? Is that a message? There might be some network connection difficulties. All right, I'm not seeing anything pop up. So I'm going to continue on speaking until I hear differently. Sorry about that. So again, where are our roots? Again, they're in that top horizon of soil. We're looking between 6 and 9 inches. That's where a lot of our feeder roots are going to be. So the roots are actually bringing in nutrients and water from the soil are going to be just in that 6 to 9 inches of roots. Now, of course, we can find larger structural roots deeper down in the soil, and depending upon the depth of our soil horizons, we can potentially find some feeder roots further down in the soil. Roots are looking for resources, and if there are resources deeper down in the soil that a root can take advantage of, that's where it will be found. Similarly, we know that our roots extend well past the drip line of the tree, in some cases more than 4 times the drip line of the tree. And that is, again, because roots are looking for resources. So they will find where a resource is and grow to it. So this is something to keep in mind when we start talking about treatments and best management practices for managing soil around trees. Now, if you look at the figure here on our left, and we think of a typical forest soil, we have here a thin layer called the O horizon. And the O horizon is made up of decayed and partially decayed organic matter. So for deciduous trees, well, for our trees really, when leaves are lost, they fall to the forest floor and they begin to decay. Other things decay there too, as well as microorganisms die and decay there, macroorganisms die and decay there, twigs fall here, we have large stems that might fall here and begin to decay, logs that fall here and decay. So this is where a lot of nutrients are going to be introduced into this A horizon here. And if you see the figure, the A horizon is, again, where most of our, in the forest, and in natural settings, where a lot of our roots are going to be found. So this is a mixture of mineral matter and composted or decayed organic matter, which we call humus. So this is where, again, the bulk of our feeder roots are going to be living. This is where they're going to be getting water. This is where they're going to be getting those elemental nutrients, which are going to then go into the tree and allow the tree to be happy and healthy. If we go further down, we have this E horizon, which is where a lot of these nutrients are leached through. And now, not all forest soils are going to be alike. This is a very basic look at a forest soil. And that goes down to our B horizon, which our B horizon is an accumulation of clay, iron, and aluminum from above. Now, for many of us, I want you to think about when you are trying to plant a new tree or you're digging the soil in our urban, suburban environments, what you're seeing. Are you seeing a very dark, rich soil mixed in with a lot of humus and nutrients, or are we running into a lot of these different clay soils? So something to think about as we talk about management, and something to think about next time you are planning a soil management plan in the soils in your area. Now, if we look at what we want a soil to look like, our ideal soil will only be 45% mineral matter. So that's 45% of hard, coarse material mixed in with 5% organic matter, which we'll see why organic matter is important as we go on through this conversation, and then a mixture of 25% air and 25% water. And this would be macro and micro pore space. So our macro pore space we want basically filled with water, and our micro pore space we want basically filled with water. So again, our roots can take advantage of the water and the soil mixture and solution, and of course, most all living cells require some kind of oxygen for respiration. So this is what our ideal soil is looking like. And as we go on through this conversation, again, I'll ask you to think about the soils that you are commonly dealing with. So soil nutrients, tree nutrients. Breaking it down, plants need about 17 essential nutrients, and this is elemental nutrients, to go through their life and be happy and healthy. Now, we have some of these, what they call structural elements, which you see is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And now, these elements are obtained either through the air mixture or water mixture, of course. Now, if we move down, we have our primary nutrients, which would be nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Now, if you look at a bag of fertilizer, NPK, this is what we're talking about, this nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Now, the plant needs a lot of these in large amounts, and these are often, or at least in agriculture, are often not found in large amounts in the soil. Now, that's because of agricultural practices. keep in mind when we're dealing in the woods or in the landscape, it's a little bit different than where we're dealing with agriculture. And a lot of our fertilizer recommendations throughout the years have kind of been borrowed from that agriculture type thought, or we're going to be needing to put back a lot of primary nutrients. Now, of course, we're not harvesting crops from our soil, so if we take soil samples, and we'll talk about that later, we might find that some of these primary nutrients that we are applying as a fertilizer might already be there in the soil. But again, this is when we have an NPK fertilizer, this is the thought behind it, is the plant is using these in large amounts, and often these are not found in the soil, and this is why we supplement them. If we move down to our secondary nutrients, this would be calcium, magnesium, and sulfur. These two are used in large amounts by the plant, but are commonly found in the soil. So they're commonly available in the soil versus our primary nutrients, the N's, the P's, and the K's, which might not be found in the soil as readily as some of these secondary nutrients. Now, of course, we're speaking in generalizations, and in your part of the country and your soils, you might have different outcomes. Finally, we have our micronutrients, and they're called micronutrients because the plants don't use as many of them per volume based upon or versus the primary or secondary nutrients. But that being said, they're still important. And in many parts of the country, we run into iron and magnesium chlorosis. So the plant isn't using as much iron as it's using nitrogen. But if we have a deficiency, then we definitely have a plant that comes out looking a little sick. So even though we're not using these in great amounts as some of the other nutrients, they still are very, very important when it comes to overall plant health. And if we look at some of these nutrients and how they work within the plant, this is a very, very high-level chart of what some of these nutrients are doing. So again, we have nitrogen and calcium, which nitrogen, of course, has to do with having nice green leaves and supple twig growth, whereas the calcium has to do with building up those cell walls so that we have a stout plant. We have NPK, B, and Cu that have to do with fruit and seed production. We have P and Cu, which have to do with root growth, K and P for defense compounds. And then if you look at chlorophyll and photosynthesis, all of the different nutrients that go into those processes, you can see that if you have just one that is not getting into the plant in adequate amounts, then you're going to have a plant that's not looking healthy and not going to be able to go through its basic metabolic processes to thrive and be a vital plant. And if we take a look at some of these nutrients and how their symptoms might appear in the plant, this is one way to identify whether or not we actually have a nutrient deficiency within the plant. And again, this kind of goes to show that it doesn't matter how much of one specific nutrient you have in the plant. If you have just one nutrient that's going to be deficient, then you're going to have a plant that's not looking as green as it should, not be as healthy as it should, and not have the same kind of vitality that we would hope from a plant. Another important thing that we should note is that you can have too much of a good thing. So if you do over-fertilize your plants, in many cases, the signs of over-fertilization or having too many nutrients in the soil can mimic having not enough nutrients in the soil. So again, this all kind of everything's interconnected, especially when it comes into the soil. So something to think about when you start going out and writing fertilization specs or soil management specs. Everything is going to play a big role in how we are managing our soils. So we know our soil nutrients are going to be tied to the pH. And now soil pH is really the concentration of hydrogen ions in the soil. So if we have a lot of hydrogen ions in the soil, then we have an acidic pH. So when we have 7 is neutral on our pH scale, anything below 7, that includes 6.9, we're going to get into an acidic soil. Now, everything above 7 is going to be what we call an alkaline soil. So that includes 7.1 and beyond, we'll be getting into an alkaline soil. Now, the soil pH affects the availability of plant nutrients. So if our pH is too low or if our pH is too high, that's going to affect the availability of soil nutrients for the plant to take up and use. So again, if we look at calcium, if our soil pH is off just a little bit, even if we have a lot of calcium in the soil, that plant is not going to be able to put calcium into it, into the leaves, so that we can have our basic metabolic functions that are going on within that plant. If we take a look at this real life scenario, if we have a plant leaf and we send it into the lab, and the lab comes back saying we have a magnesium deficiency, we think to ourselves, well, let's fertilize our soil with magnesium. So we fertilize our soil, we still have deficiency symptoms. So this time we take a soil sample to see what happens. So we have our soil sample comes back, and we look here at our magnesium level, and we see that it's 302 parts per million, which is very, very high. So we think to ourselves, well, we have a lot of magnesium in the soil. Why am I still getting magnesium deficiency symptoms? We take a look at our soil pH. Now look, our soil pH is at 5.6. We go back to our chart and look, we see that between, well, starting right here at about 6.0, magnesium becomes harder for the plant to take up as the soil pH begins to decrease. And now we have a soil pH of about 5.6, so right here, the scale. So even though we have a lot of magnesium in our soil, because of our soil pH, the plant is not able to take advantage of that magnesium, and we're still getting magnesium deficiency symptoms. Now let's think about the amount of soil nutrients that a particular soil can have. So the amount of nutrients the soil can hold onto is explained as the cation exchange capacity. So the total number of cations a soil can hold, or its total negative charge, is the soil's cation exchange capacity. So if we take a look at our chart here, the cation exchange capacity can be tied to our soil texture. And now when it comes to soil texture, we have our three components are sand, silt, and clay. If we look at our sandy soils, we have very low cation exchange capacity. That means our sandier soils cannot hold on to as many nutrients as, say, our clay soils, which have higher cation exchange capacities. So again, I want you to think about the type of soil you're working in throughout the country, and think about whether or not you're dealing with a very clay soil or a very sandy soil. And maybe that has something to do with what you need to, or maybe that has something to do with when and how often you need to fertilize some of your plants. And now I'm not sure if anybody has ever really thought about how a plant gets nutrients off a negatively charged particle, but this is a pretty good chart to explain what happens. So two things might happen. So this is our plant here, obviously, so now we're looking at our root hair. One thing that might happen is our root hair might pop off some carbon dioxide, which is going to mix with water in the soil, which is going to leave way to this positively charged hydrogen ion, which is going to go ahead and be attracted to this clay particle and pop off a soil nutrient. So that soil nutrient will then go into soil solution, water solution, and be able to be taken up by the plant. The other thing the plant might do is simply create its own hydrogen ion, send that out. That is going to pop one of our soil nutrients off our clay particle, and then that's going to be able to be acquired by the plant. So this is how CEC works. This is what's going on in the soil. It's pretty crazy to think about. Now this chart I will explain. When this was presented to me by Dr. Kim Coder at an ISA, a Southern Chapter ISA conference a few years back, this just about blew my mind. So what this chart is summing up is, here are our different soil nutrients. And now in some cases, two soil nutrients together on a soil particle will actually be helpful. So if we look at boron, and let's say one of our, either our manganese or magnesium, or excuse me, if we have calcium here, and we have our negatively charged nitrogen compound, we'll actually have a synergistic effect So these two will be aiding each other, if in one manner of speaking, to get into the plant so the plant can start using them. Now that being said, we can also have elements that are antagonistic. So if we have too much of one or another, then we can actually be preventing take-up from one of these elements. So again, if we look at calcium and our positively charged nitrogen here, then we're actually going to be, these two are going to be fighting each other to get into the plant. So if we over-fertilize or misapply either calcium or our ammonium, then we can actually still be creating a situation where the plant is not getting one of these two elements, and we are still going to have some kind of deficiency symptom in the plant. So again, if we look at something like, again, calcium and magnesium, both are secondary nutrients, both are positively charged, both are going to be available at about the same soil pH, but if we refer to our chart, calcium and magnesium can be antagonistic to one another. So that once again, this becomes very important when we start thinking about how we want to go and fertilize plants. And now, once again, when I saw this chart presented, I wanted to go back and look at every single property I had fertilized the year previous, because at this point I'm thinking to myself, what have I really done to the soil around these trees I was trying to help? So this ties into soil structure. So, we've reviewed our soil nutrients and why they're important and which ones are important and why. We looked at our cation exchange capacity, and we kind of talked about why that is important and how that is responsible for getting nutrients in the plants. But of course, this is all tied into soil structure. So, and this soil structure is going to be what now is going to be responsible for getting water and air to our roots. It's going to be responsible for having a high or low cation exchange capacity, and is also going to be responsible for what's keeping our roots in the soil so our plants aren't falling down. So our soil structure looks something like this. We have soil particles, which when combined make a PED, and now those PEDs stacked together around each other, becomes our actual soil structure. And now this is a good example of good soil structure. You can see we have multiple size PEDs in this sample of soil structure, and that's what you want. You want PEDs that are different sizes, so you have both micro and macro pores, and you have a good amount of CEC so that you're going to have a nice healthy soil. We don't want something like this that's a single grain for a few reasons. One is it's going to be hard to maintain a good combination of soil water and soil oxygen. It's also going to be hard to maintain that plant within that soil, because you can see these will be easily broken apart, so we might have a chance of wind throw. Something we run into very, very often is this here, this platy soil. And now the disadvantage of these platy soils are it's hard to get water, and it's also hard to get root infiltration down in here. Now if you imagine water, rain hitting this, rain can only enter the soil through this one small crack in our plates here. And then the water has to travel laterally through here before it can get vertical back in the soil. So this is not a very great soil to deal with. But again, in many of our urban and suburban environments, this is the soil we are left with after construction. Likewise, it's difficult for roots to penetrate in this. Again, roots have to travel a very long way to find a place where they can start going vertically. Whereas if we have a soil that is broken up into different PEDs, we have a lot of options for soil penetration, both water and root penetration. Now, how soil structure is formed, and again, we discussed this a little bit in one of our very first slides, but again, if we look at a natural environment, soil structure is being influenced by everything in the soil. So everything from our microbes that are microscopic and our fungi, which is very small, to insects crawling around in there, to worms, to even molds and even larger beetles and things like that. Those things are living, they're eating the detritus on the forest floor, incorporating that into the soil. They are living, they are dying, they are pooping. All of these things are working nutrients back into the soil, and then just their physical movement in the soil, along with the roots of the plants, are also just creating this really good soil structure, which we don't often run into, again, in our suburban and urban environments. And here's a quick little excerpt of, if we look at microbes in the soil, when we look at a healthy soil, some of the things we want. You know, bacteria, we're looking at millions per gram of soil in a healthy soil. Fungi, again, thousands to millions. All these little microbial living things play a large role in both getting nutrients available to plants and creating soil structure. So again, if we look at our urban and suburban environments, what are we often looking at? Well, we're looking at soils that were once nice and spacious for our roots, now being compacted. We have a situation like this where we are removing our O and A horizons and being left with some kind of a subsoil that we're then trying to grow plants in. And of course, you know, we have now a clay subsoil, and we have that compacted. What's that going to do? That's going to reduce the amount of pore space in the soil. So instead of having a lot of macro pore space, we're going to be left with more micro pore space, which is going to be difficult to get air into. It's going to reduce the amount of soil oxygen, which is going to reduce the amount of soil root penetration. So again, we're not going to have a very fully formed root system. And of course, we know that if we want healthy plants, we need healthy roots in a healthy soil. One thing that I think we also need to think about is how water interacts with soil texture, and specifically soil textural change. So water does not like to move in between different kinds of textures. In elementary school science class, many of us probably went through the experiment of planting a sunflower seed in some kind of styrofoam cup and watching it grow. And I'm sure many of us were told to put a coarse material like some kind of large rocks or pebbles in the bottom of that to help it drain. Now, water has hydrophobic and hydrophilic properties. And as I mentioned, water does not like to move into different textural classes. So if we have a very, very fine textured soil, like a clay, and we put that on top of a coarse textured soil, like a sand, it is going to take a lot before water moves out of that clay soil into our sandy soil. So that clay soil is going to hold on to water for a long time, even if it has a sandy, coarse base underneath it. So again, if we have a lot of roots living in this clay soil and we overwater, then it's going to be a while before that water moves out of that soil, out of that root zone. Now, on the other hand, if we have a very coarse textured soil on top of a very fine textured soil, we run into the same problem. This water here is not going to want to move and drain into this clay soil. So if we have if we create some kind of a bed or some situation where we have a very coarse soil that's sitting on top of a clay soil with no way for the water to go ahead and break up and get into this clay soil, then we've essentially created a pot for our plants to live in. So keep this in mind when you go back out and start thinking about how we're going to amend or fix some of these damaged soils in our urban and suburban environments. So again, what are some of the other things that we run into out there in the world? You know, one thing we like to do is we like to plant trees in very, very small planting spaces. So again, we're just simply reducing the amount of resources this tree has access to. And what's that going to turn into? That's going to turn into a crown that's not looking that great because, again, we're not getting as much water and nutrients as we need because we have a very, very small space for roots to get resources from. The other thing that we really like to do out in the landscape is we like to plant turf. And we like to plant turf right up to the bases of trees. And now turf can be very aggressive when it comes to interactions between water and nutrients. Turf likes water and it likes nutrients, just like our trees do. So we're adding competition to that root zone in this case. And some turf also has allelopathic properties, which means it'll put out chemicals to inhibit root growth of competitive species, like our trees. And this is one of these pictures that has probably been going around for years and years and years, but it's very, very depictive of what happens when we have tree roots growing under grass. And if you compare that to mulch, which the idea of correct mulch is to mimic the forest environment, we have a larger volume of roots here under this mulch compared to this grass. So we've talked about some of the bad things we do to plants in the urban environment, so what can be done? And what I tell people is if their plant health care program is nothing but correct mulching, then they're probably doing the best thing they possibly can do for trees. Now I could talk about mulch all day long, so I'll try to keep myself short here. But we know mulch provides multiple benefits for plants. It regulates soil moisture, so we keep our soil warmer in the winter months. We keep our soil cooler in the hot summer months. We also regulate soil moisture. So again, we'll be able to keep our roots happier with a nice moist soil, not getting as dried out when we get into periods of drought. This also provides great food for our macro and microorganisms that are going to be living in that mulch, which of course creates more available soil nutrients. Again, composted organic matter is going to create more CEC, which is going to improve our soil's ability to hold on to nutrients. And again, those organisms living inside that mulch are going to carry down into the soil, and they're going to help create new soil structure. So again, just by adding one layer of correct mulch, we can be doing a lot of really good things for the soil around our trees. We've also found that some of these microorganisms living and feeding this mulch can be antagonistic to other root pathogens. Specifically, correctly mulching around a plant, the microorganisms living in there can be antagonistic to Phytophthora root rot, which is a very common root rot for many of us throughout the country. So not only are we adding nutrients to the soil, helping to improve soil structure, but we can also be preventing some of our more damaging diseases to our plants. If we look at this chart here, just again to kind of drive home the benefits of mulch versus grass, we can see here just the changes in bulk density. So bulk density would be basically the amount of compaction or the amount of pore space in a given volume of soil. So we can see with mulch, our bulk density is much less compared to grass. Not quite half, but much less. Our moisture content is going to be much greater. We're going to have, again, almost double the amount of moisture content in the soil. Root density, again, almost double. We don't need to break this very much more, but we can see that just by correctly mulching the plant, we're going to have much more, much greater health effect than simply grass by itself. If we look at some other charts, this is from the Garden Professor's blog. When we look at the results of mulching versus not mulching on some species, and we look at relative growth rate, here we can see the mulched is this kind of checkered pattern versus the no mulched is this solid line. And while with arborvitae, it didn't seem to really matter, but with some of our other species, we had some very, very great impacts just by mulching our plants. Same thing if we look at here, again, this is from the Garden Professor's blog, stem caliper versus mulching versus no mulch, which you can see here. This is London plane trees. And this was done in conjunction with different root ball treatments to try to improve the plant's ability to adapt to a soil and get new roots out into the soil. Just by mulching, we have a much greater incidence of having larger stem caliper than no mulch by itself. So if we mulch the tree and we still would like to do more for it, or if we can't mulch the tree and we want to do our best to improve the soils around it, the next best thing would be to do prescription fertilization. So prescription fertilization would be based around taking a soil sample and custom blending some kind of a fertilizer to what that soil actually needs. Because again, if we look at our chart earlier on in our discussion, doesn't matter how many of one element you have. If you have just one element that is lacking in the soil, you're going to have a plant that's unhealthy. again, one of the other things we mentioned too is a lot of our NPK fertilizer recommendations have come from agriculture. And growing trees in a suburban and urban environment is a lot different than when we are farming a large field with one crop and we remove all of that plant material at the end of the season. So if we look here at a soil sample, we can see our organic matter is low, so that's something we're going to want to address. Now look, our phosphorus is very high. So if we were to use a complete fertilizer and add phosphorus into our soil, we might not be doing the best thing for the plant. Once again, in some cases, having too much of an element can mimic not having enough of an element. So we might create a situation where we are actually harming the plant by over-fertilizing. Again, if we remember our chart about our synergistic and antagonistic elements, if we are over-fertilizing with a specific element, we could be keeping another element that the plant wants from actually getting into the tree. So if we go on down our list again, we have potassium is low. So this would be something we want to address. Some of our microelements are low. So in this case, we want to be looking at a fertilizer blend that would have some microelements along with some potassium. Now, if we look here at soil pH, our soil pH is a little alkaline. And if we remember our chart, when we get to be a little bit alkaline, we might be, again, tying up some soil elements. So this would be a case where we'd want to definitely, or at least attempt, to lower our soil pH with some kind of amendment, which can be difficult to do, but if it's not addressed, then we're not going to get the proper nutrients into the actual plant. With prescription fertilization, this is another time that people like to put in some of these actual live beneficial soil microbes. So this would be the time that a lot of people might decide to put in something like beneficial nitrogen-fixing bacteria, if that's an issue. Now, keep in mind that if there's plenty of nitrogen in the soil, this bacteria will probably not create a condition that it's going to fix nitrogen. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria are usually found associated with plants where there's low nitrogen in the soil. This might be also a time some people would like to apply these antagonistic fungi. Specifically, the Trichoderma genus of fungi have been shown to be antagonistic to many pathogenic fungi. So this would be a time some people might try to apply these. With prescription fertilization, this is often a time where people also want to provide mycorrhizal fungi into the soil to try to build that mycorrhizal symbiosis that, of course, is between a fungi and a plant root. Now, again, in many healthy soils, mycorrhizae is already going to be there. In soils that are not healthy, this is where we find that we might need to put in mycorrhizae. Of course, that being said, if the soil is very, very harsh, then the mycorrhizae we're putting in might not survive the application. Another thing to think about when we are applying mycorrhizae is that different species of plant are going to form different kinds of associations with mycorrhizae. So making sure we are matching the species of mycorrhizae to the plant, and those species are broken down into two main categories, which would be endomycorrhizae and ectomycorrhizae. Making sure that we are using the right genus or species of mycorrhizae for the plant is important. So again, as an example, if we applied ectomycorrhizae to an elm, we probably wouldn't get an association. If we applied endomycorrhizae to an aspen, we probably wouldn't get an association. So making sure you're matching your mycorrhizae to your plant species is important when it comes to doing prescription fertilization, if this is the road you decide to go down. There is a lot of products out there that can also be a combination of a lot of these different things. Everything that from products that would just provide some of the Trichoderma beneficial bacteria and ectomycorrhizae, all the way to some of these products that will provide all of those associations in combination with the complete fertilizer and some of these micronutrients. And this would be the line that we provide, which would be the Die Hard line. And if you have any more questions about that, then we can get back to you at a later date. Now another thing you can do, this would be something that you could do in the meantime while you're trying to get your soil back to its proper health, is apply something like a growth manager. So our product Cambistat, which is paclobutrazol, not only does it shut down the production of gibberellin, which is responsible for tip growth, but it has been shown to increase the production of chlorophyll. So the plant will have green leaves, which would be very attractive to your clients. But additionally, it will actually encourage the production of other plant hormones, namely abscisic acid, which is a plant protection hormone, which has some things to do with stimulating fine root growth. Also helps the triggering of the closing and opening of stomata, which will help with transpiration, making it a more drought-tolerant plant, and also protects cells from dehydration. So by applying something like this, this will provide benefits to the plant on a hormonal level, while we can attempt to get our soil chemistry and our soil structure back to where it needs to be. And again, an example of this, creating more chlorophyll. So if we had a soil that was creating a situation where we were getting more chlorotic plant, we can influence the plant to create more chlorophyll while we are doing other treatments to the soil to try to get our soil health correct, so we can have correct plant health. And an example of the increased root growth, which again, this will help us get more resources out of the soil. So if we are doing treatments to try to improve soil structure, and we get those treatments installed, we can encourage the plant to get more roots into the soil to start taking advantage of those resources, so we have a healthier plant that's more sustainable in the soil versus having to go back and do treatments over and over again. There's other options out there too when it comes to getting nutrients into the plant. And again, this would be another example of something we could do to the tree in the meantime while we're also trying to solve our soil issues. So we can inject something like verdure, which would either be iron or manganese, depending upon the type of micronutrient problem you're having. We can inject this into the tree to solve the immediate micronutrient problem, and now that would buy us time to start getting our treatments into our soil, so that in 3 seasons, when our verdure injection is worn off, hopefully we'll have a soil that is now more conducive to root growth and would have the primary and secondary and micronutrients available to the tree. And again, an example here, we have a very chlorotic looking plant, we've injected it, and now several years later we have a very, very happy looking plant there. We're able to solve the soil problem. Now, you could also go and you could do the full-on treatment, which we call root enhancement. So this would be a process of decompacting the soil, taking a soil analysis and actually adding in prescription fertilization on top of your decompaction, combining that with the incorporation of composted organic material, and it's important that this be fully composted organic material to help rebuild soil structure and fill in and coat these soil particles so they don't recompact. This would also be a time that you could apply something like your Cambistat to influence plant hormones, or do an injection of something like verdure to, again, immediately get micronutrients into the plant. Do this process, and this is going to give you happy, healthy growing plants. So this process begins with decompacting the soil with an Airspade. Now the Airspade started becoming popular there in the late 90s, early 2000s, and it was devised as a way of blowing compressed air into the soil to create new pore space. So to break up micropore space and add more macropore space into soils that have been compacted or naturally clay. Now, a lot of people say, well, this is just basically a tube you put compressed air through. Can I build this? And some people do try to build it. But really, the specialty part of the Airspade is this nozzle. And there are different nozzles you can choose from, but it's this nozzle that really directs the air to give us the pressure we need to break up our highly compacted soils. You can see it comes out of there about 2,250 feet per second. I don't know if anybody in the audience today has ever used an Airspade, Now, this thing is pretty incredible when it comes to moving soil. It's also great for blowing off patios and things too at the end of the day after you've blown a lot of soil, because you can see it's a very, very messy process. You are moving a lot of soil at high velocity. So something that you're going to want to think about doing when you do these decompaction treatments or these root enhancement treatments are buying screens or something like that, bringing tarps with you to cover up sensitive areas, because you will get dirt everywhere. You also get dirt everywhere on yourself, including in the waistband of your underpants, so be prepared for that as well. So again, what this does is this flows compressed air, it breaks up the pore space, expands and loosens the soil. Now, if we look at root enhancement, what we want to do is ideally what we'd want to do is we want to decompact around the entire critical root zone. Now, of course, we know that is not practical in many situations. So what we'll want to do here is, at the minimum, we're going to want to break up an area that's about 3 times the diameter of the trunk. And then if we could break out into these keystone areas where we are breaking up and adding nutrients and compost to these areas that are underneath the tree. And this looks something like this. So this would be the minimum that we would do here, about 3 times the diameter of the trunk. Breaking that up with the Airspade. Adding in our fully composted amendments. Again, it's important that these be fully composted to, again, reduce the amount of recompaction. And also, you want them to be fully composted so that we're not interfering with the carbon-nitrogen ratios and some of the other ratios that the microbes are going to use to break down nutrients and make them available to the soil. Ideally, we would mulch this correctly and then water it in, and this would be our final product. It would look something like this. Now, here's an example of a tree at the Morton Arboretum. This was a declining white oak, and now this, we used radial trenching here. Somebody used radial trenching here. It wasn't the full root enhancement, but an example of, over time, how something like this can really change the health and appearance of a tree. So here we have this white oak in 1989. So what happened was somebody came in, they deadwooded the plant, they applied the growth regulator treatment, the Cambistat, to encourage the secondary health benefits of the plant, combined that with radial trenching, which included fertilization and the addition of composted organic material. See the plant in 1994 is a drastic change. 2001 looking really good, and here it is in 2014 looking like almost a brand new tree compared to 1989. Some other uses of the Airspade are to do root collar excavations. So root collar excavations can be very, very important to the plant health. You know, I'm sure many of us have noted out there that many plants nowadays are planted a little too deep into the landscape. And now this has 2 negative effects on the plants. One is that root flare is trunk tissue. And that bark is trunk-esque bark, and that bark has evolved to be out in the air. It has not evolved to have that excess soil moisture on it. So that excess soil moisture can actually break that bark down and give way to pathogens to move into the tree, or simply break down the vascular system at that part of the tree. The other thing varied root flares will encourage are stem girdling roots. And we know that now with a stem girdling root, what we have basically is we have the trunk of the tree and we have the root vying for the same space. And over time, sometimes the root flare will win, and that root will either be absorbed into the root flare or simply die. But in other cases, the root will win, and it will push into the tree and cause a dead area on the tree, which of course will break down the vascular system in that area, and that can lead to overall decline in the plant. So if we're stepping back, some of the symptoms of stem girdling roots or berry root collar would include tip dieback, general decline in the tree, chlorosis, early fall color, also that telephone pole look, where the tree is simply just straight up and down in the soil with no root flare whatsoever. So this was the primary reason that our service side of the company began using the Airspade. Especially we manage a lot of maples and birches, which are very, very prone to stem girdling roots. And from a practical standpoint, the way Rainbow works this is charging between $10 and $20 per inch of diameter Smaller trees would be on the lower range, larger trees would be in the higher range, and then having a minimum charge for the site visit. And again, it's always best to have at least 2 people on site, but this is something that one person can go out and do all day and be very profitable at. So again, finding other uses for your Airspade once you've purchased it. This can be something that really is a return on your investment. Some other things you can use the Airspade for are to very quickly do root collar excavations when you're doing macro root flare injections, especially if you're in an area that deals with Dutch elm disease or is dealing with oak wilt, where it is very important to get down on that root flare to get proper distribution of the product. You can use the Airspade to very quickly do a root collar excavation and blow that soil away versus going in there with a spade and brush. And of course, the nice thing about using the compressed air over something mechanical like a spade is you are greatly reducing the chances of damaging the bark of the tree or the roots of the tree by using the compressed air. Some other applications of this would be doing trenching, especially for utilities. We have done many of these in my career where we are going to be trenching underneath large roots to put in things like gas lines or water lines, service lines to houses. So this is a way to cleanly get in and do a trench around a tree where, again, without something like an Airspade, you would have to do by hand, which would be very, very tedious and take a long time, or most often what is done, of course, is buying a trencher, just trenching that root flare, or trenching right through those roots, which of course can cause damage to the health of the tree, but if it's done too close to the tree, it can also become a structural concern. Again, this is also neat for finding roots underneath construction. So again, if we are doing some pavement replacement, if we need to do some root pruning, instead of just intermittently going through there with a trencher, we can find those roots and we can do a clean cut so that root can heal over faster. Many, many uses for an Airspade out there. Really great tool to have in your toolbox when it comes to doing plant health care treatments. So how Rainbow has used the Airspade once again as a service company was, every year picking a service to focus on, creating a market for it, using marketing and training your arborist representatives to go out there and really focus in on this on every property. So as an example, in 2009, this was proposed on 659 properties, and of that, 431 times, so 65%, some kind of Airspade work, whether it be a full root enhancement or whether it be root collar excavation, was accepted. So that concludes our discussion on soil management. We do have several other upcoming webinars throughout the next few weeks. You can go to treecarescience.com/events to sign up for them. Some really good topics with some really good presenters. If you haven't heard of this, this is the Saluting Branches campaign. This is an effort to go out and do a day of service on several veteran cemeteries throughout the country. There'll be 22 cemeteries throughout the country. We're looking for over 1,000 volunteers to go out and do pruning on these sites. So if this is something you're interested in, you can go to salutingbranches.org to get more information, sign up. It's going to be a really great event. And again, right now we're looking for volunteers. We're looking for site leaders that will actually lead and meet with the agronomists for these sites. And we're also looking for sponsorship so we can get shirts and lunches and things like that. So again, that concludes our discussion. If we have any questions here, I will address those now. Again, I'm Patrick Anderson. You can email me at any time at panderson@treecarescience.com. Call me direct. Please view our website. And then our Solution Center. At any time, you can email info@treecarescience.com and also call right there for any product information or ordering. So let's see. Bear with me here. We have some very good comments. Very good. And now some of these I'll also address offline for you. If Greg Smith has offered a lot of really good questions, Greg, I'll address you offline, as some of these are pretty in-depth and we are running low on time. Okay, yeah, we do have some really good questions here that I think we're going to want to go in depth through some emails and maybe some side conversations. So I will get to you if you've asked some of these questions here by the end of the week, no problem. All right, guys. Well, if there's no more general questions, which there are not too many of, then we will conclude the discussion for today. I really, really thank you for your time. Again, if you have any questions, please feel free to call or email me. If I didn't answer your question here in the questions box, I will get back to you. And again, remember our Saluting Branches campaign is going to be a really good day of service. Thanks, everybody, and have a good afternoon.